All right, guys, before I start this video, I just want to kind of show you what the end result of the disassembly is so you can see if this is going to help you out in what you're looking for. So what we're going to be doing today is replacing and rebuilding the upper control arm. We're going to be replacing the bushings and the upper ball joint, and we're going to be replacing the lower ball joint. And so in order to do those three change-outs, this is the level of disassembly we have to do. We, of course, have to get the spindle and rotor assembly off. And so we're going to have to get the ball joint studs popped out of these two areas here, these two cutouts, and then remove the axle here. I'm sitting it on this piece of wood, just so that the flange doesn't get damaged. We're going to need to pull the top part of the shock absorber out, and we're going to need to remove 3 of the retaining pins for the dust cover because we're going to need to get access to removing the bolts that hold the control arm in the upper position in place. And then we're going to push out these bushings and remove this original riveted upper ball joint and then replacing it with all new GM parts. So that's what we're going to be doing today. This is the passenger side. Just wanted to stop for a second and show the state that it's in. And now we're going to film actually getting to this point on the driver's side. So let's get started. All right, guys, let's get started on the driver's side. Take the wheel off. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to be using this just like I did on the passenger side. I'm going to set this over here. And when we take this caliper off, we're going to end up sitting it on the tire just so that we don't stress it. And actually, that's the first thing we're going to do, is we're going to remove the brake caliper. So I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to take a 3/8 inch Allen wrench, and I'm going to start loosening up the pins here. So I'll do that. We'll pause it. And we'll come back when I get them loosened up. Okay, I've got this guy. I think I got this guy loosened up. A little bit more in the back. Yep, okay. So before I actually pull him out, I'm going to take this 13 millimeter bolt here out. This is holding the clamp for the hose. It's also securing one of the brackets for the speed sensor wiring. Just going to stick this back into the spindle assembly for now. Let's go ahead and get this guy out. And then, like I said, we're just going to gently twist him over. And we're going to sit him on the tire. Just make sure there's no kinks and no sharp bends, and he'll be fine. Okay, next guy we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and get this bolt that's holding this other bracket for the speed sensor out of the way. We're actually going to end up discarding this bolt, but for now, we'll just keep it in here. And then we're going to remove it from these factory retaining clips. All right, the next thing we're going to do is on the outer tie rod here. So here's the outer tie rod is coming in and attached to the spindle here. We're going to remove this nut. Sometimes you give it a little tight and twist before you go. It'll make it a little easier to get it off. Okay, we're just going to hold that there. Now, the next thing we're going to need to do is undo the nuts that are holding the tie rod studs on. So there's this I'm sorry, not tie rod, the ball joint. The upper ball joint here and the lower ball joint way down here on the bottom. And so what we're going to do for that, just make sure this is out of the way. I'm going to have to go in here and remove the cotter pin. I have to get a couple of tools for that. I'm going to use I'm going to use a pair of long nose pliers and maybe even a flat plier to get this out. And it's flashlight because it's in the shadows. Make sure you guys can see it. And I'm just going to show it to you. So depending on how old the vehicle is, you can see here the bend. And basically the cotter pin head is wedged right here in this part of the castle nut. Then it goes through a hole in the stud And the way the factory did it, these are the original ball joints, by the way. They've never been changed in 21 years, so I expect this to be pretty hard to get off. And then one side of it's bent over, the other side sticks out straight. All you do to get these off, you bend this guy straight, and you can use the awl to plug it out and pull it through. So that's what we're going to do first. Get that guy straight. You just got to work your tool that you have in here. Now, if you're in a salt area, this guy might even be completely rusted away. So don't be surprised if you don't see it very clearly the way I've shown it here. Almost. There we go. Once you can get a hold of him, then you can pull him out. There he is. He's been removed after 21 years. Now, most of the time, it's not going to be that easy for you. Like I said, it's going to be rusted on. I'll show you this one on the bottom here. Same procedure. Get him straight as you can. This one actually lucked out, came right out nice and easy. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to remove, or at least loosen, we're going to loosen these castle nuts on these two studs. And got to get a different size socket for that, so let me go get that and we'll come back. All right, guys, just in case I didn't mention it, this was a 13 socket for this bolt, and this was an 18 millimeter. So 13 millimeter and then an 18 millimeter for the nut on the outer tie rod. And the guy on the bottom here is a 26 millimeter that we're going to be using to get this nut off the bottom ball joint. All right. And I'm not going to take it all the way off. I'm just going to loosen it up right about for there for now. Just want to have like that much space because we're going to try and get this spindle to drop down, and this is going to help catch it. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this guy off the top. Now he actually turns out to be a 27. And again, this is all factory original, made in 1998, never touched before, so your sizes may vary. This is what it is originally, and I don't know if I'm even going to get this in here. Not a lot of clearance with the four-wheel drive axle here. So I am going to switch to a 27 millimeter wrench. But before I do that, let me go ahead and take care of this guy on the front. We're also going to need to loosen this axle nut. That happens to be a 36 millimeter. I'm going to use an impact wrench for this. Not going to take it off. I'm going to leave it on. Just wanted to get the torque broke on it. And let me see if I can find my 27-inch wrench. We're going to pause and come back in a second. All right, guys, I got my 27 millimeter wrench. Let's get this nut here, get the torque broke on this guy. See if he's on all the way. There we go. All right. See if we can give a pull and get this guy loosened up. Yeah, he is on there nice and tight. Get a better angle on the other side. Try to push it loose. All right, there we go. Same deal as the bottom. We're just going to loosen them part way. Okay. Now the next step is we've got to get the spindle rotor hub assembly dislodged from these 3 friction fit attachments. The upper ball joint stud, the lower ball joint stud, and the outer tie rod stud. So we're going to start first with loosening up this guy. So the tools I'm going to start with for this, I'm going to have a rubber mallet. And I'm going to start with a brass hammer. You know, I'm just always start with brass before I resort to something bigger, because you might get lucky and not have to need it. What we're going to try and do is we're just going to try and do some friction hits, or excuse me, some shock hits on the side here, so we can dislodge this guy. Make sure you're wearing eye protection when you do this, and hearing protection. And what I do is occasionally I'll give it a hit with the rubber mallet to see if I'm getting anywhere with it. There we go. All right. We'll set this back on here. One down. At this point in the video, we have concluded all of the easy steps. So now we're going to have the hard steps. We're going to be doing the same technique, starting with the upper part of the spindle so that we can free the upper control arm. And then we'll do the same thing on the lower. I'm going to use the same tools, although I'm also going to have handy, in case I need to get some extra persuasion, I'm going to have this bigger 4-pound hammer that's made of steel, in addition to the brass hammer. All right, with this disconnected, we can kind of twist this any way we need to. Same deal. Except this time, we're totally depending on gravity to help pull it down for us. Make sure you're very careful with this speed sensor wiring. You do not want to give that a hit, or you'll be replacing the hub assembly. Okay, that dropped. Now I want to tell you something, right? This has not been off of here in 21 years. I'm frankly very surprised that it came off without resorting to the bigger hammer. The tie rod was replaced, I don't know, maybe 2 years ago, so I kind of expected him not to be too hard. But that guy expected to be more of a fight than that. Now the next one we've got is the lower, but before the lower, I don't want to have any tension, any more tension rather, on this speed sensor wire. So I'm going to go ahead and disconnect that now. Look down here, I've got a little tool. I actually replaced this dust cover 3 or 4 years ago, right? So yours might not even be here, but since I spent the money and time to replace it, I don't want to completely tear it up. So I'm just going to remove a couple of these pins. And then what you can see on the other side here, I'm going to disconnect this guy here. The end of the wire is similarly attached into the frame. Pull this through. And then at the very top here, let me get my flashlight. I can tell the lighting's not that great up here. There's another 13 millimeter right there. Just a real awkward position. There we go. All right, he's out. Same as we did down here. I'm going to leave him where he goes so we don't lose him. Just going to tuck him back in there just like that. Okay. All right, we'll sit this up here for now. We got this guy. So we just didn't want this to get pulled, to have some tension on it, particularly on the back side when we're getting ready to do the next step here of trying to drop the bottom. All right, same thing we did on these other two. We're going to take our hammer. Going to kind of lay down for this one. And again, can't stress enough, eye protection and ear protection for this particular step. I'm just kind of repositioning mine so that I can still lay on the ground and have it on. All right. There's a flat right here, and that's where we're going to start trying to apply some pressure or some shock. Same on the other side. And then the other thing I'm going to do here, since I can sense this one is going to be the one that gives us a pain, I'm also going to position a small jack under here. Try to get some additional pressure going in our favor. I'm going to take this castle nut and I'm going to put it upside down. If I can. There we go. Now we're obviously replacing this, so I don't care if anything's damaged. You might want to do something different if you're trying to salvage something. Just want to put a little bit of pressure in the other direction on this guy while we try to get gravity to help us out. Just a little bit, just so it's taut. What we're trying to do here is we're trying to get this guy to drop in that gap. Step up to a larger hammer now. Try not to hit the jack. This is about what I expected. Even for the top. Hasn't seemed to have moved at all. So I'm going to go to the next tool, which I've used sometimes. Now you've got a separator tool like this. There's a small size you'd use for a tie rod. This is a large size that'll clear the size of a stud for a ball joint. I'm going to show you on this side, but I'm actually going to come in on the other side because I got more room to swing. But this guy's going to fit in between, like this. It's going to fit in between the top of the spindle and then between the boot area of the ball joint. This type of tool destroys the boot, but we're changing these ball joints anyway, so we don't care. This side, you'll be able to see on this side, hopefully you'll be able to see this thing drop. I'm going to be using the big hammer to wedge this guy in. try to give it a few good whacks, so don't be surprised if it pops out a few times. So I'm trying to use 2 hands. Nope. Just cannot get him wedged in there. All right, guys, so I'm going to be hammering on this for a little bit. I'm going to pause it so you don't have to sit there and watch me do all this, but I'll bring it back right before we get it to come off. All right, getting a little bit of trouble with that guy, so I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to go ahead and remove the upper, let this come back a little bit. And I'm going to get a piece of wood. Just going to stick this under here. So later on, we're going to use that to help cushion this guy coming off. What I'm doing this for is I want to get the gap underneath opened up enough so I can get that fork to fit in there. Wish I could get a socket to fit in here. All right. All right. Now what I'm thinking is, well, actually, we got lucky. That little drop finished it off. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, this guy, you see the gap is closed. I'm going to get a couple other pieces of wood where I can let this guy come out. And we're going to take this nut off so that we can extract out the axle. And then we'll have this guy removed. So just let me get a couple pieces more wood, and we'll pause for a second. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and loosen this right to the edge. I'm not going to take it off all the way just yet. I'm first going to get this guy the rest of the way off. Okay. All right, so now the only thing holding it on is this. This here. Find our speed sensor wire. Make sure it's not going to hit anything. Sometimes you might have to give this a little whack. Almost. I think it's still wedged on there a little bit, unfortunately. So I'm going to leave that on there. come in here and see if we can finish it off. All right, guys, I'm going to have to pause this for just a second while a car passes over here. All right, let's pick up where we left off. Get this fork out of here. Just held on by a little bit. All right, let's try it again. Yep, still holding on there a little bit. I keep doing this because I don't want it to fall, you know, hit my knee or something when I'm not ready for it. I'm using this brass punch to try and not do any damage. This guy is just still stuck partially in there. Go ahead and there we go. All right. Finally. Probably could have cut some corners somewhere here. But essentially at this point, the next thing we're going to want to do is bungee this axle up out of the way. Yeah, I have to get a little crowbar. I'm going to rest him up here and put a little baggie around him to keep some debris off of here. And we're otherwise good to go. Next thing we're going to do is push this out. So let me get some stuff to strap this up here and we'll come back. All right, so I'm just going to take, you know, like a Ziploc bag. Just my personal preference. Don't want to get a lot of debris onto this shaft, this axle shaft. Set this up in a little better situation later. And then I'm going to take a crowbar. Hopefully that's going to be sufficient for me to get this thing to clear. There we go. Get him up out of the way. We're next going to go after this guy. And for whatever psychological benefit it might have, put a little PB blaster in here. You never know. And then what I'm going to do is move this spindle rotor assembly out of the way. I'm going to cover him too, though, because I don't want to get any dirt or stuff in here either. This might not be the best bag. I may try to find a bigger bag in there later, but this will be good enough for now. I'm just going to kind of pick this up. Move it out of the way to the side for now. All right, so up until this point, and by the way, this was hard, this bottom one, and it was the same experience I had on the passenger side as well. And I'll tell you for sure, this will be even harder. What you've got here is originally these uppers were riveted in by the factory. After 21 years and rust and everything, it's going to be extremely difficult to get off, but it can be done. We'll do that last, and then we're going to take the alignment bolts out here so we can remove this whole assembly. Now, if you're not choosing to change the ball joint separately in the bushings like I am, and I'm going to show each of these things being changed separately, then at this point, you could just jump into replacing the lower and then taking the bolts out here, pulling this whole assembly out, and you can buy these assemblies preloaded with bushings and a new ball joint. Now, that's an option. I'm just choosing not to do that. I prefer to do it the way I'm doing it because that's the old school way to do it. Next guy we're going to do is going to push this guy out. So this is a friction fit. This is a 98 vehicle, K2500. This will be the same setup. This is a forged lower control arm, not a stamped lower control arm. So you take a notice of it. And this type of ball joint is what's called the second design ball joint. It's pushed in and also has a special kind of adhesive in there as well. And I'll show that in a little while. Just noticed we lost our little bolt off this bracket. Before I forget, toss that back in. Tighten it up. We are going to discard that, but I just want to hold on to it for now. All right, now to get the ball joint off, we're going to need to use a special tool. And nothing fancy. I picked this up at Harbor Freight a long time ago. They still sell them. Get a 20% or 25% off coupon and get it at the right time. It'll be cheaper than the ball joint itself. Just going to take this apart. This goes in the top. Occasionally you put some grease on this. You don't have to do it all the time. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be pushing this guy straight through. So I just leave this guy on bare at the end. But in the beginning, just to spread some weight around, I'll start with this. And then what you got here is a flange. This is the bottom of the ball joint. And so you need a cup that this whole thing can sit in. This one here. And then we need an adapter on the bottom that's got a hole in it so that the stud will come through as we push it out, like so. All right, so now we've got our adapters. It's just a matter of getting this guy on and clamping him down. And by the way, in case you've noticed, right, sometimes on the side, I just want to show this, and sometimes people make a comment. So I am not holding this truck up with the jack. There's a jack stand back there. I'm just a super paranoid kind of person because I have seen a jack stand fail. So I typically leave the jack stand and the jack, and I even have another jack stand just in case, just pointing out what you're seeing here and why. If you ever see a jack stand fail, it will change your life, I guarantee you. Okay. Part of why we got this up out of the way is so that we have enough room to do what we're about to do. I'm going to rotate this here so that he is pushing up against the control arm. And then I'm going to use a 7/8 inch socket on the top up here. If I can find what I did with it. There it is. It's a really tight fit. Might have to use my Pro bar again. Give me some clearance at this control arm. There we go. All right. Definitely eye protection again. Hearing protection probably as well. I'm going to go ahead and do that because these guys can pop. They're pretty loud when they go. All right, I'm going to have to stand up for this. So basically we're going to be pushing down. We're going to make sure that this is nice and leveled on the control arm and that we can see that there's clearance for the ball joint to fall through. And the other thing I'm going to do is make sure that the stud, I can feel it through this hole, so I know I'm not, pushing against the tool or the edge of this, which is going to end up busting the tool for sure. Okay, and then it's just a matter of cranking it down. Now you can see in here, there's a gap because we've already pushed it probably a millimeter or so. And then you can see in the back here, there's still a gap between this cup and the control arm. I'm going to go ahead and bring it down to there, and then I'm going to take this cup out. I'm going to push it the rest of the way through with just the tool's end itself. All I'm doing this for is to try and spread the force to initially get it through. All right. Now we're going to take that cup out. Now again, if you're using the GM factory fitting or factory ball joint, and again, this is the original one, the Zerk fitting can stay on. It clears the bore just fine. When we do this part, we just want to make sure that we have this right on the top of this cast iron head of this thing. And now we're just going to push it the rest of the way through. That's it. So like I said, this tool, you can pick this up at Harbor Freight. Probably a lot of other places that make similar tools. It's very similar to the tool that the actual GM dealers would have used, although a hell of a lot cheaper. Maybe 50 bucks on sale. And then here's our lower ball joint. There's that flange I was talking about. All right. The big guy is the hard one. So like I said when I started this, that there's the easy stuff was up front. Sometimes getting this guy off can be hard, but rarely, because you're not going to have one of these on that's still original. At least you shouldn't. And this guy, he can sometimes be hard. He's not in, his boot's still in good shape. I'm not replacing him because he's actually failed or anything. This particular truck has led a pretty pampered highway life, so you get a lot more mileage out of these than you normally would. Something like this you normally replace around 150,000 miles with a genuine GM part, unless you had some severe service. But the passenger side one was completely shot. Actually, I'll flip over for a second in the video here. I'll show you how bad the passenger side was, and then we'll come back over here. Right, just to show you guys real briefly the passenger side, just before I remove this upper ball joint. This is just giving the example of when you can see when one's failed. You shouldn't be able to move this up and down like that, right? So not only has the rubber gone out, but the entire joint has failed. That's the main reason that I was replacing this side. Went ahead and replaced the lower as well. The lower is in actually pretty good shape, considering that it's the original 1998 one, but it's just a matter of time before it fails too, right, given the age. All right, just want to show you that. Let's go back to what we were doing on the driver's side. But yeah, so you can see this one's nowhere near as bad as the one on the passenger side that I flipped over to. So this guy here is, I'd say, is order of magnitude harder even than getting the lower stud to release from the spindle. Like I said, this was not so hard. This one's usually not hard. This one's always hard in my experience. I find that the rivets here are probably the hardest. I've done a couple of techniques here, where you get an angle grinder and you grind these down, and then you kind of air chisel the tops off and then try to push these rivets through. The factory service manual calls for drilling them out. I've had it where you've done a little combination of both, where I grind them off and then I also drill down. It depends on the situation. When something's like this and it hasn't been replaced in a long time, personally, it doesn't matter what you do. It's going to be a pain in the ass. So on the passenger side, I did do the angle grinder technique, and I wasn't really happy with how long it took. On this side, I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to try to drill the top out and then drill in. And then what we'll do, these rivets are just, there's absolutely no way I believe they're going to be able to be punched out. They've been in here for 21 years, and they've kind of fused with the metal by now through corrosion and heat and stress. What I'm going to try and do is just get them to loosen enough where we can get a chisel in here, and we're actually going to remove the whole ball joint. I'm going to chisel it away from the arm and pull the rivets out with it. So let's get set up for that. I'm going to take a lunch break here, and we'll pick it up. As you can see, we started this right around noon, and it's coming up on 1:30. So about an hour and a half into the job, probably another hour and a half to go, mostly because of this. These guys coming out won't be any big deal. These bushings will come out with the same tool we use to get the ball joint out with some different adapters, and I'll show you that as well. All right, let's take a break and we'll come back. All right, guys, we're continuing on from here from the break. I'm sorry it's a little bit overcast at this point, so a little less light. Maybe it'll clear up as we go. I don't think it's going to rain today, so we shouldn't have that problem. All I'm doing now is I'm trying to get a lot of the crud off around these rivets, that just all contributing to helping hold this thing together after these last few decades. Just want to get as much of it out of the way. I'm also saving myself from having to clean up as much afterwards on the ground here by getting it out of the way now. I'm interested in what's in this inner area because that's part of the seam between the control arm and the rivet body. And I'm also, for the technique we're going to be using here, I'm going to be trying to stick a tool in here and use this to do some of the impact shocks that we're going to do. Also trying to get this cleaned up, just enough so we can see what we're going to be drilling. Like I mentioned before the break, we're going to be drilling this guy out factory style. The other side, I mentioned I did use an angle grinder, but felt like it took too long, so we're going to do this technique on this side. All right, I think we are good enough to get started. And just to show you what I was talking about, what I was mentioning before, you can take an angle grinder like this. You can come in here and you can burn these heads down to their paper thin, and then you can take a chisel and a hammer, or you can take a might be using this tool later for something else. You can take an air chisel and take them off, and you expose the rivet inside the body of the control arm. But we're going to be doing this instead. Okay, so first thing I'm going to be doing is marking this so that I can drill it out, or at least drill into the head. Just going to try to help myself get as close to the center as I can by eye, really. No rocket science here. My Sharpie's kind of giving up the ghost on me. going to use the Sharpie after this to mark where our alignment is on our alignment cams before we pull the bushings off as well. So keep a Sharpie handy for a couple of these tasks. Now the next thing I'm going to do is grab my hammer and grab a punch. If I can find what I did with the punch. I forgot to get my punch. All right, so I'm going to go grab my punch. We're going to do a punch in here. I'm not going to film that. We'll just come back. I'll punch this out, and then we're going to start drilling. And the procedure I'm going to do, just to show you guys, I'm not just making this stuff up, right? The actual four-wheel drive removal procedure from the service manual, the GM service manual, you know, for this particular second edition, second design, the last few years, is to drill a 1/8 inch hole in the top of the rivets, go down 1/4 inch, and then step up the size to a 1/2. We're going to do slightly different. We're going to start at 1/8. We're going to actually do the 1/4 deep. Then we're going to step up to 1/4 before we go to 1/2 as part of knocking these guys out. All right, so let me go find my punch and we'll get started drilling. All right, just going to do the last one here. And now let's go ahead. I'm going to put just a little bit of light oil on here. We're going to use that kind of like a cutting fluid just to help speed things up. So we're going to go down all three of these with a 1/8 inch bit, get it down to about 1/4 inch. And then we're going to come back. I'll switch the bit and we'll keep going in stages. All right, these guys came out pretty good. This one is actually a little bit off center, so I didn't drill him as deep as I probably would have if he was where he was supposed to be. We're going to step up to from the 1/8 to a 1/4 now. Make sure you're wearing eye protection again on this. Our little pieces, as you can see, are going to go flying. So you can see in here about the depth that we're talking about here, right? Literally going into this about the width of the bit and then a little bit more. When it's off center like this one, I don't want to go too far because I'm trying not to do any damage to the control arm holes themselves. If we were to accidentally drill in and enlarge those, we'd have to trash the whole control arm because the bolts that hold the ball joint wouldn't be able to seat properly. Okay. Actually, what I'm going to try and do here, I don't expect this to be the end of our thing here, and we're also going to need to restrain this guy down because he's still bouncing a little bit from the bushings, but never hurts to try to do some early shocking on these things. So I didn't expect anything to give this early. It does help set us up for success later. All right, put some more oil in these holes. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in with the 1/2 inch bit and shear the heads off. That'll be the last step with the drill itself. So just want to watch carefully our depth with this technique. Again, because we do not want to go into the control arm itself. And then what I'm going to do now, I'm going to see if this head is weakened yet. There we go. All right, so that head is off, and we don't have any damage to our control arm. So I'm going to go about doing that same technique to these next two so that we get all three of these heads off, and then we'll come back. All right, we've got all three of these heads off. And now we come, this is, straightforward. The hard part is how to get it to the next stage. Now, what you would do if this vehicle was younger, you'd be able to put a punch in here. You'd be able to push down, bear down on the control arm. And you'd be able to drive these rivets out. But it's been too many years. So what I've found in my experience is if it goes this long, they're in there pretty good. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be doing a technique where we keep pounding on all three of these rivets. But we're also going to cycle around on the body of the ball joint itself. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to get any corner or lip to open up. If we can get anything to open up, what we'll do instead is we'll take this chisel and we'll use it as a wedge, and we'll get it in here, and then we'll use this to try to push our way through and prise them out as we go. So that'll be the technique that we're using here. I won't obviously show the whole thing, but I'll get started, and then we'll pause, and then we'll come back as we get progress. You can see now, though, that the point of doing the partial drill out is to get room for the punch to sit inside the control arm. Help steady it for your hand. Again, you got to bear down on this because some of your force is going to be lost to the bushing effect. And then I'm going to come back here and try to hit on the body itself a few times. And what I'm looking for is, again, I'm going to keep doing this until I can get some kind of a gap, either on here or on here. And as I make better progress, I'm going to move this axle down here. Most of the debris is gone by then, and I want to get it out of my way because I don't want to accidentally, miss with this and hit this and damage the flange or something. Something else I'm going to do at this time, I'm going to go ahead and start getting these bushing shells soaking in PB Blaster just along the control arm, not on the outside. We just want to get it on the inside piece here. It's going to help us out later. And the reason we don't want to do this on the outside where the alignment cams are is, like I mentioned earlier, we're going to be taking a Sharpie and we're going to be marking the current alignment position so that we can get close to what it is when we put it back in, take it down, and have it done by a professional shop. Now, the whole thing I've been waiting to do these repairs is for these tires to be ready to be replaced. Put all this fresh hardware on there, go down and get 40 sets of tires and let them do a full-up alignment with all new hardware. All right, so I'm going to keep doing this procedure. We'll come back when we get the first break here. All right, guys, we're still working our way through this. I've moved the axle down here, got it sitting on a piece of wood so that the flange doesn't get damaged. I've used a bungee cord here to try and take some of the shock jiggle out while we do our hammering here. We've got it to the point, you want to find the weakest side, and the weakest side is usually the side that has the bracket for the wheel sensor because it's missing one of the rivets. So we can get a putty knife in here now, which is progress. And what we want to do is we want to keep working that to the point where we can get a small chisel in here, and then that'll help us give these guys to break away. So what I'm going to do to try to speed that up a bit, I'm going to try to weaken this one rivet a little bit more by drilling straight through the head. Just using a slightly larger bit than 1/8. And I feel like by doing that will help weaken the walls of this rivet so that it might collapse just enough for us to get done what we're trying to get done here. So we're going to keep doing that, and we'll come back. We have another bit of progress. Okay, so I drilled not all the way through the head, but probably just 1/4 of an inch from it. I'm definitely inside the area of where the rivet's inside the ball joint. I was worried about weakening this top piece here because I don't want it to break off. But if you look on the other side, you can see that that gave us enough more weakness that we've got a small chisel in here now. So we've been able to step up from the putty knife, the metal putty knife, to a small chisel, which means now we'll be able to step up to the big chisel and we'll be able to start working this guy out. So we'll come back as we get going. All right, guys, we're just continuing to work around here. We've got this gap opened up some more. You can see the rivet on this side. What we're doing is we're continuing to come in here with the chisel, just wedging it in here, using the smaller one to help break it free, push it around. We'll continue to work our way around. When we get around to here, I'm going to switch to a small crowbar. I'm going to start giving it some persuasion in this direction too here, right? So you see if I just push down on this just like this, I'm slowly getting it to come loose. So we're almost there. We're about halfway through. We'll come back and get some more progress. All right, I think we just about got this. Now we just worked our way around and just need a little bit more to... So we've got all these guys out. We just got this guy in the back. That's the only thing holding it on still. And there we go, finally. All right, so I guess, you know, this technique took about the same amount of time as doing the other side with grinding them off. There's just no really choice we could do. You see these rivets are all rusted up inside there. These guys weren't too bad, but by keeping the heads on the rivets, the peened end on, we're sure that they didn't break off inside. As you can see, if we had cut this off and took the ball joint off and left them in there, we never would have got them out. We would have been having to try and drill them out without damaging the size of these holes and disturbing the bolts that are going to sit in here with the replacement ball joint. All right, so that's done. Next thing we're going to do, we're going to go ahead and remove the rest of this dust shield. We're going to come in here and measure, not measure, but we're going to draw what the current alignment is. And then we're going to take out these bolts and pull out the actual control arm, and then we'll be ready to start cleaning it up and start rebuilding it. All right, we're just going to continue to remove this dust shield. Now yours might be gone. You might even be missing these little pins. I think I mentioned earlier in the video I had replaced them a while back. So I'm trying to keep them together. All right, there's that one. And this guy here. All right, take this out. All right, and then we're going to give another shot of PB Blaster to this bushing outer shell. You'll see why later. We're also going to give some to the threads on the outer nuts only, just to make it easier to get off. All right, so next thing we're going to do, we're going to need to remove the shock absorber and bring it forward in order to remove this bolt. This bolt can come out because there's clearance, but this one can't. But before we do anything, we're going to clean up these cams. I'll show you on the flashlight here. These cams are what controls part of the alignment of the front end. And so there's this bolt has actually got a flat end. You'll see when I take it out. These cams have like a half moon shape and they sit in there, and you get your adjustment in and you lock this in. So we're going to want to protect what this is. So I'm going to clean this off so that I can write on it. So get all this dust off, because when we put this writing on here, we want it to stay. And we're going to do this to all 4 of these cams. I'm only going to show you one, and then I'm going to do the others. You're not going to loosen this up until you get this step done, because it'll give you a good enough alignment to get into the shop. Using a flashlight here because I'm I'm sure it's kind of dark in here at this point with the sky being so overcast. All right. Now you can use whatever you want to do this, preferably something like a white grease pencil or something, but the Sharpie I'm using is just fine as well. I like to make 3 marks. I'm going to make one here, one here. I'm going to make one here. And this one I'm going to carry back to the back frame mount. And this one I'm going to carry to the top in this part. And this guy I'm just going to carry right there. It's just so that when I get this in here, I can kind of eyeball that I got this in the same place that it was before. I'm going to do this on all 4 of these cams, and then we'll take them out. We'll come back. All right, guys, had a little bit of an interruption. There was a little light rain here, and hopefully there'll be enough of no rain to get to this next stage where we want to get this guy removed. So here's where I left off. I told you I was going to mark these alignment cams with the Sharpie. And so you can see here's this one on the outboard side. Here's this one on the inboard side. Now, in some cases, yeah, the Sharpie actually just scraped off, but it's enough for me to see the mark, right? The important thing is I can see, like this one, it actually made a bare metal mark as it scraped off some of the crud. We got that, the 2 on the top. And, of course, we got this last one over here. This is, you can see very clearly on this side. All right, so we got all these. And I started to loosen up the shock absorber bolt that's holding this upper piece. So that's what we're going to do next. I'm going to go ahead and take this nut off of here, and I'm going to go ahead and take the nut off here and here. So that's what we're going to do now. All right, we're taking these nuts off of these alignment pieces, and you're going to need to keep these in the same position and the same side when you take them off. So it's bolt head and nut facing out, bolt head and nut facing out. So when we put them back in, we want to make sure the bolt heads are on the inner and the nuts are on the outer. And also, because this is an alignment piece, we've got to keep this one separate from that one. So we're going to keep this one over on the right-hand side and this one on the left-hand side. Go ahead and take this guy off as well, at least the nut, as I loosen them up off camera. Okay. And then I'm going to try to move this out. It's like a washer. I'll show this to you when I get it out. So this one we can get out without removing the shock absorber. Then we're going to pull this guy out to get this one out. But this is what I was trying to show you before. These bolts have a flat on one side, and then these alignment guys sit on that flat, like so. And that's why we did this marking. The one on the other side is the same way. So don't rub or put any oil or anything on here that's going to mess up your marks, or that will all be for naught. Okay, so we got this guy off. And this guy's ready to come out. So to get this guy out, this bolt, we got to take some tension off the lower control arm. So we're actually going to bring a jack in here. And by the way, I don't know if I mentioned it, these were 21 millimeter bolt head and nut, and these are 18 millimeter bolt head and nut. So I'm just going to put this jack in position, and the only thing I'm doing here is to take some tension off of this guy so that we can pull him out. Just a second here. And I'm just using the piece of wood to kind of spread the lift. We're not pulling up any kind of really heavy weight here. Just trying to compress this shock absorber more than anything else. Maybe one more. And we'll see if we can get this bolt out of here. There we go. Okay, there's a little washer, a flat washer on this side. I might have put it up just a little bit too far. You'll know you got it right when you can turn this with your hand. Okay. So I can turn the bolt. Still can't push it out all the way. So we'll just give it a little persuasion here. You just got to fiddle with the jack a little bit, get it to the right spot. Because there's all this pressure on the shock absorber at the moment. All right, I think the rest of the way I can get it off with a socket. Still under enough tension that it's almost like I'm having to unscrew it. Once we get this guy out, then we can pull this shock absorber forward, and then we can get the last nut out. This is going to be the last of the alignment cam bolts out. Almost. There we go. All right, nothing fancy, just a simple shock absorber bushing bolt. We'll keep this handy. Pull this guy forward. Put all this back on here so we don't lose it. And now we'll do the same thing on this side that we did over here. As soon as we can get this cam off, the corrosion is what gets you. Again, we'll set this guy here, and we'll pull the other side out, and now we're done. And again, we'll put this on the left side because this is the left one, and now our control arm's out. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to get, so we can see that we didn't have really any severe damage. We had a little bit of some paint getting scraped off here. There's not even any gouging on the bottom. On the top, we didn't do any damage with the drill. We did a little bit of damage when we were trying to chisel it out here, but none of that's going to get in the way of a flush fit for the new ball joint. We'll clean up some of this corrosion and more crud here, and we'll smooth all this out. But now we're going to press out these bushings, and then we'll be ready to do reassembly. So let's get set up to do that, and let's move on. All right, guys, let's pop these bushings out. I've got some of the tools laid up here, and again, just like we were doing before, we keep trying to help ourselves with some penetrating oil. Obviously, we've had a few hours of this now, so maybe you'll get the benefit of that. So the same tool we used to pop the lower ball joint, we're going to use to push these bushings out of the control arm. I've just got it laying on a couple pieces of wood because I don't want to get it all scratched up. You could just as easily, put this in a vise and try to do it that way, or maybe you want to do a shop press. Either way, you're going to need some adapters here, right? So I've got an adapter here so that I can clear the end of this outer shell, so that I can basically be bracing against the control arm. I'm going to be pushing this bushing out this way. Now, the kit, I think I showed this earlier, but I'll show it again. This is, like I said, I picked this guy up over here at Harbor Freight. This is where you get the actual press itself, the C-clamp, and these adapters. I think this is like, like Harbor Freight calls this like a Maddox brand. But I'm actually also using this extra kit that I have from them. This one goes from Pittsburgh Automotive, and it's just another set of adapters for this thing. Because the set of adapters here, the one you would want to use, is just not a good fit. It's kind of tight, right? Now what you can do, if you just have the first kit, save some money, What I did on this as an example on the passenger side, you can get a die grinder on this thing and maybe take a millimeter or so off of this so that you can get it to fit with just the base kit. So that's just a tip to save some money. And again, you know, you don't have to buy these things. You can rent these kits at most any auto store for this job. All right, so let's get started. So I'm going to have this adapter here, and then I'm going to have a piece here that I'm going to use to be pressing against. This is going to fit inside this piece. You can see it's depressed, and this is the piece that we're going to be pushing. And then the piece I'm actually going to be pushing out is going to be here. And ultimately, I'll probably do this, but to get started, until we get that first pop, I'm just going to do this. And again, you know, if you've got one of these and it's old because it's coming from your garage, or maybe you rented it and it's just got a lot of use on it, you can get some light grease on the threads. It'll make it a little easier to do what you need to do here. But this is a whole lot better than screwing around with torches and hammers and all that craziness. This is the, you know, civilized way to do this. All right, and I'm also going to be using a little pipe extension on this ratchet. Now you can use a breaker bar. This is not under enough tension that I'm worried about anything with actually using the ratchet. So I'm going to get this kind of started in my kneeling position until I feel some resistance. Actually, I can see right now that I'm not going to be able to do what I wanted to do because I don't have enough clearance. I'm just trying to avoid having these things fall apart on me like they sometimes do. So this is not going to be enough room. It's going to hit the control arm too quickly. The reason I'm doing this is, right, what you want to be pushing on is this inner shell. This metal piece here is attached to the inner bushing, and it sometimes can just get pushed into this and it won't really help us. So I was trying to have something here that, until I get the first crack of the tension released, that would grab a wider area perhaps. So I'll try flipping it around. See what that does, but that's not going to work either. Sorry about that, guys. Kind of didn't think it through. I'm going to switch to the smaller one and just go with that. And we'll take a shot and see that hopefully it will not push through the outer shell. Definitely want to have everything nice and lined up so all the force is going towards getting this pushed out. All right. That's another kind of situation where you want to be wearing eye protection. And you might even want to have some hearing protection on, because when it goes, it's going to have a little pop to it. Now you're going to be watching this end to be going in. It's definitely going to want to wiggle around on you. It's eventually going to give, and we just press it straight through. All right. So this point's a little bit crooked on me, so I'm going to reposition it. Installing's a lot easier. this guy right in the center. All right, let's try to finish him off. This is the part I was mentioning, right? So this inner has a tendency to want to slip inside that outer. But we'll try to take this a little bit further. Then maybe we'll switch to another, like a socket or something like that, an impact socket, and that'll give us the extra outer shell grab that we're looking for here. Let's see how far we can get with this guy. There we go. Didn't have to do that after all. And you can see there was that loud pop. For those of you that were listening on with earbuds, sorry about that. That's how you pop a bushing out of a control arm. We'll do the same thing on the other side. And again, you know, this putting this penetrating oil on early on, I definitely am a believer in it, that it helps. We'll pop that out, and then what we'll be doing is cleaning this out and polishing it up with a wire wheel just to get some of the corrosion off. We don't want to sand it or take any material off. And then clean this up, and we'll come back and start reassembling. All right, guys, we're just finishing up cleaning up this lower area here, just trying to wire brush the opening for pressing in the new lower ball joint. You don't have to get everything off, but you want to have this be shiny and smooth on the contact points. And then I'm using brake cleaner to get rid of any residue. I've also wire brushed underneath on the flat mating surface. Now, the part we're going to be putting back on here is another GM part. And this lower ball joint for this forged control arm, this is, as I talked about earlier in the video, this is a forged control arm. There's another design that's earlier that's a stamped steel and welded piece. It takes a different ball joint. I'll roll that part number at the bottom, but this one takes GM 12387682. This is a brand new, never opened part here. So we can take a look at this guy and get a new castle nut and a new cotter pin with it. And the first thing I like to do on these, especially when we have multiple part numbers, is just trying to compare out that we've got the same thing, right? And so we can see this is the same thing that we took off. Same exact part. Now when we open this up, we see there's a little tag in here, and we'll find inside this tag that's running through the cotter pin hole, it says here that this also requires an adhesive, a bonding adhesive, GM part number 12377901. So this particular design is not just pressing the ball joint into the control arm, but you've also got to glue it. Now that glue you can get from the GM dealer, but it's easier to find at your, in a Loctite brand. I'm going to show you here on the service manual. We'll step up on top here. We can see if we look in the service manual, some places instead of the part number, they actually mention what this is, and it's Loctite 680. And so that's what we're going to be using here. We're going to be laying a 1/4 inch bead of Loctite 680. So we can see that down here, right here like this. I'll put a link in the description how you can get this in eBay. It's a little 10mm bottle. It's plenty enough to do both sides. I could not find this particular product locally, but I did find it on eBay and only got it in a few days. It was a very good price. So we're going to mount this guy on, but before we do that, we're going to be using our ball joint press to put this guy in, just like we used to get it out. So to put it in, I'm going to use this cup adapter to go up on top, because this guy actually doesn't protrude up enough for this to be a problem. This is actually going to work out just good for the top piece. And then we're going to need a piece on the bottom that'll go on this push adapter for the bottom for the stud to fit through. Right? We're going to need an adapter that will grab this flange. And I think what I ended up doing was the base kit. If you look over here, right, I was mentioning there's a base kit and an extended kit. And I think what I ended up having to do was go to this extended kit to get something that was the appropriate size. So it ends up being the number 2 cup for this. And I can combine that with this other piece, and we have what we need to push this in. And when we push it in, the zerk fitting is going to fit this depression area and face to the rear of the vehicle. All right, so let's go ahead and put our 680 on here. Now they tell you to use a solvent from Loctite, Loctite number 755. It's not a primer or an activator, it's just a solvent to degrease it. So I've found that brake cleaner is just as good. And if you're having trouble identifying these two parts, the other part number I'll roll at the bottom for the other design, the serrations on this design are very fine, and the serrations on the one for the stamped and welded control arm are much more pronounced. So you can visually tell the difference between these two different types of GM ball joints. This one just has a little bit of surface rust from sitting in the container. All right. Now this is an anaerobic adhesive, so as long as we keep a little bit of air in the container here, it won't dry out. So just got to get it to work its way in. It's pretty cold out here today. There it goes. All right. So we're just going to roll this guy around in a bead that's 1/4 inch around the middle. And then we're going to get set up with our press. Won't necessarily bore you guys with my penmanship with this Loctite container, and we'll come back when we got it all ready set up to install. All right, we've got our bead on here, and we're going to line this guy up. And again, I'm mostly just concerned that my zerk fitting is in the appropriate position for maintenance access. Get my bottom adapter on here. Not pinching my glove. And I'm just trying to give it a little bit of a push in there, just enough so it'll stay on its own so it doesn't keep getting in my way, wiggling around. All right. Get our press on here. Turn this a little bit this way so it'll be pushing up against the control arm as I tighten it. All right. So you can see also I bungeed the axle shaft out of my way here up on the steering stabilizer link, so it's up in my way. I'm going to get our 7/8 inch wrench again. And all we're going to be doing here is we're going to watch for this gap to close. It's not much to it. Now I prefer to use a ratchet on here rather than an impact wrench because I just want to go slow so I can see that it's going in straight and even. And what I'm going to be watching for is, as I get it all the way on, that adhesive should get squeezed out the edges. So have yourself a rag ready to clean that up. We're starting to close that gap. Just a little bit more. And then you see as we get to the point of bottoming it out, we get that adhesive coming out the edge. Just going to clean that up a little bit and show you that we've got a nice smooth mating here of the ball joint flange with the control arm. So I'm just going to give it one more kind of tug just to make sure, and then I'm going to loosen it up. And there we go. Our lower ball joint is installed. So next thing we got is our upper control arm. So you can see we cleaned up our upper control arm. We've got this also all wire brushed out, polished. We don't want to take any material off, so you're going to see maybe some light surface discoloration or corrosion. That's fine. We just want to get most of it cleaned up. We got all the mud and crud that was in the way of the upper area here. And we also took a pipe cleaning brush, and we got some cleaner in here, and we cleaned out these holes the bolts are going to go into. So now the next step will be to install these bushings. These new bushings are GM 15607586, and we're going to put 2 of them in here, and they're going to go on both ends. They're going to be the same part number on both ends, and we're going to use the same press that we used to put this guy in and take these out. We're going to use the same thing to push them in. I'll show you how you can find something that fits around this flange, because there's not going to be anything in the kit that fits the flange on this bearing. It's actually 2 1/8 is what would be the right size. The closest thing in the kit, in both even the expansion kit, is a 2 3/16. And it's close, but you know what's going to happen is it's going to slip in there. It's just 1/16 of an inch too big. So I'll show you what you can use instead. So we'll come back and I'll set that up. All right, guys, you can see I got the other side in here, and I'm about to put the last one in here. I like to put a little bit of 3-in-1 or any kind of cheap lightweight oil. It's just something to help with the assembly, and something that'll degrade pretty quickly and won't, you know, cause any slippage or anything. This stuff will break down pretty quick. All right, and then as the big side faces outward, just like you see here, and the small side faces inward. And what I found that I was going to use to press this flange down, because you know some people like take a socket, or even worse, they take a hammer and they hit on the bushing area. Number one, the hammer can flatten these ridges, which is part of what wears away that you need to replace, but also it can damage the bushing. So I'm actually going to use my my bearing separator kit, and I'm just going to stick one of these guys in there. And that actually gives me a nice fit on that flange. And then I can use this from the master kit. I can use this number 6 2 1/4 by 2 1/2 inch adapter like that and press on it. And then I can use this cup from the base kit to catch it on the other side. So before I do all that though, just to make it a little bit easier so it doesn't pop around, I'm just going to kind of set the guy on there and give him a few whacks with a rubber mallet. Doesn't do anything, just kind of holds him in place so he doesn't walk around on me. And then I'm going to get these 2 guys in place, and the real trick is doing all of this basically with one hand. All right, so get this guy in the position. And then you just want to make sure everything's straight and lined up, right? So we'll make sure this cup is not catching on the bearing that's going to be coming. It's going to be the bushing part that's going to be coming through. And we want to make sure this guy, like we see this guy kind of slipped up on me, and he's not straight. So we're going to kind of reposition him to get him straight. Straight as you can get it anyway. And then we'll be able to see his progress as he goes in. We'll be able to watch this gap close. Between this kind of contraption and a little bit of oil, hoping I can do this with one hand. It does walk around on you, that's for sure. You get it part way. I'm going to actually reposition it because it's not quite straight. Usually if it's fighting you, you probably have something crooked and it's pushing against itself. Okay, now I'm probably going to stop here and do a test fit. So I'm going to take this off and we're going to test fit it, because there's 2 ways you can kind of do this. You can measure the space in between the flange and the control arm when you take the old ones off, and then you can kind of push it in to that same point. What I like to do is push one till it's seated, and then the other one kind of just push it in part way, and then do a test fit, because the rust and corrosion can change the frame brackets by a little bit. So we'll do that now. All right, so I'm going to come over here. I can position this here so we can see. All right, we've got about a good 1/4 of an inch left. So I can go ahead and close this gap safely, and that should give us what we need for it to actually finally fit in here. So let's go finish it up. All right, I think we got it. I'm going to go ahead and take this guy off. And so this side is, let me get a flashlight here. So this side is not fully seated, maybe a millimeter out. And this side is fully seated. And I think that's going to be the compensation to have it fit nice and snug. So, doing this technique, there's a couple of little bends on this flange. That doesn't matter. The piece that matters is this piece and this piece. These outer pieces are what do the work. And you want to protect this rubber bushing. This flange is only there to do what we did, to push it in. And it'd been nice if we had a cup that, fit on that, but we didn't. And this got us through it. All right, let's see if it fits now. All right, so you want it nice and snug. So I'm going to go get my rubber mallet. I'm going to pound it into place. And then we're going to put our alignment cam screws back in. And I'm going to let this guy down and get him out of the way so we can put the upper ball joint in. Come back. All right, guys, the rain got us yesterday. I got this passenger side done, but before I could come back here, finish this and film it, we had to abort. So we're back out here this morning just to wrap it up. You can see now I've got this guy in here. Yesterday we talked about positioning him. And we've got the bolts with the camber cams put back in on both sides. Remember, bolt heads are inboard, nuts are outboard, and then we've put our shock absorber back. I took the opportunity to move the bushing, the metal bushing that's inside the rubber bushing here for the shock absorber, get it back centered. It's probably almost time to replace this guy because of the rubber bushing. The shock is fine, but the rubber bushing is going, but we'll deal with that some other time. And at this position, right, you want to have this where I can lift up on this very easily with one finger in both directions. That means I've got these bushings properly centered in with the arms like we were talking about yesterday. And all I've done is I've got these guys in finger tight. That's it. And I should have that level of movement. We're not going to torque these until everything's put back together and we put it on the ground. You don't torque these kind of bushings until you have a load on them. You have to preload them with the load of the vehicle. All right, so it's time for the upper ball joint. So I'm going to replace that with another GM part here, 15969282. Another brand new part here. Got a plane flying over here. What you'll get in this kit, you'll get the ball joint itself. It's going to have like a little protective cover on it. And then you'll also get a little bag with some parts. And most of these parts are going to be, you get the castle nut and the cotter pin for where it goes into the steering knuckle assembly, just like on the bottom one. And then you get a bunch of bolts and washers and prevailing torque nuts rather. They're going to secure it. Now, the way this would have been done originally, just to show you guys, the way this would have been done originally is, and again, this is a 3/4 ton 4-wheel drive, so this guy's going to mount on the bottom like this. You would have put these rivets in a jig assembly, and it would have held in there, and you would have used a special tool. I have one of these because some older cars, if this was a 1958 truck, I'd be putting rivets in it to keep the original look. And you'd peen the rivets with this tool on the bottom. And you don't do that modern times anymore, but just kind of showing you guys, what the original concept was these rivets like this. We're actually going to be securing it with these bolts instead. So, pop these bolts out. And I mentioned very early in the video that we would end up discarding the bolt that was securing the bracket for this speed sensor wire. And the reason for that is we're going to put these guys in instead. And so there's really not much to this. Let's get all these parts out of here. All right, and then we got one of our nuts has somehow got stuck in the nuts. We got nuts and nuts here. There we go. These nuts. All right. I'm going to pop this guy in here. Now, they go in with the bolt heads on the bottom. I'll show you in the service manual that. Sometimes the kit has a flat washer. Sometimes it has a lock washer. It varies, doesn't matter. We're always going to put the washer on the nut side if it's a lock washer. It's kind of optional for a flat washer, but I'm going to go ahead and put it over here as well. And what we're going to end up doing after this is we're going to torque these three down to 17 foot-pounds, and then we'll just leave the last one until we get the rest of the assembly going and we have the bracket for the speed sensor. So I'm going to go ahead and torque these down. But before I do that, let me show you what I was talking about in the service manual. So when you look at the service manual, and again, you got to be careful that you're looking at the four-wheel drive section, right? It talked about how to drill these out. We already did that. But here you can see when you get to the reassembly point, they're pointing out that the bolts go on the bottom with the heads facing down and the nuts and washers go on top. And for a 1500 and a 2500 K vehicle, it's 17 foot-pounds. If you have a 1-ton, a 3500, it's actually 52 foot-pounds. But this is going to be a 3/4 ton, so we're going with 17. So we'll torque these up and we'll come back. All right, guys, just finishing up this last one. And again, this is 17 foot-pounds, and we'll do this guy after we get the speed sensor in position. All right, at this point, the other thing I did is I've greased up the half axle here for the splines and around here. You definitely don't want to get any grease on the threads, but it'll help us with assembly to get it on here. I've had this piece of wood here, you know, to protect this kind of flange, but beforehand I've actually went around. There were a couple of little dents in here, and I've taken a brass hammer and a punch, and I've kind of knocked them out because we don't want that scraping on this seal down here that sits inside the steering knuckle or spindle, right? Tomato, whatever you want to call it. At this point, we're ready to put this guy back on. I've cleaned out from grease where the two ball joint studs are going to go on the top and the bottom. And then just to try and keep the speed sensor wire out of the way of getting damaged, I've just kind of pinned these two brackets here by hand just so he doesn't get pinched or damaged. If you screw up with him and you get him damaged, you'll end up having to pull this out and change out the rotor, excuse me, the wheel hub here, because that's where the sensor is. All right, the way we're going to do this, I'm going to try and, have this ball joint bend up a little bit forward. So you're going to work this guy, if he's brand new, he might be kind of stiff like this one. You're going to have a helper kind of keep this in position. You got to get these two pieces in, and this guy won't go into the wheel hub assembly unless he's perpendicular. And so the way we're going to get this up in position so that we can get it on here and on there is we're just going to come in here with a 2x4. I got a 2x4 here. It's about 4.5, 5 feet long. And we're going to just use that as a lever. And we're going to get it underneath, and we're going to pull it up. So we'll pull the camera back to the point where you can just see what's going on here. You're going to know that somebody's over here to the left. Now, you might be able to do it alone. I can't. Definitely don't have the arm strength to do this whole thing myself, but this works pretty good for me. All right, so get in position here to do this. And once you get it on this far, you slip that piece of wood down there. All right, put the wood back under the rotor area and then prise up. Okay. Now we got enough to get this guy on. Make sure the castle side is facing down. And then finger tighten it. And then we'll put this guy on this side, washer, and then nut to hold it. We can take that wood out now. This will be enough to hold it into position. All right, so we had a little burp in the video there. In order to get this to work, this angle you see here is critical. This thing's got to be at this kind of a 45-ish angle so that you can surface the, seat the stud in order to get this guy perpendicular. So he's going to come in perpendicular in this direction. So then what you can do is just grab a 27mm wrench and just tighten this guy up. We're not going to torque him yet. We're just going to tighten him up until we can feel that he's snug. And then we'll do the same thing on this side with our 36mm socket. and then we'll do the top. So let me go do that and we'll come back. Okay, we snugged this guy up. I mean, just enough to pull in some of the slack from the back, so you can see the flange has surfaced into the steering knuckle seal area, and then we tighten this guy up. You can see there's just a little bit of thread sticking out. So now we want to get the stud into the upper. So for this, we're going to kind of bend this guy forward a little bit so that he's in the right insertion angle. Push this up here. There we go. All right, and then what we're going to use is a jack on the lower control arm to help close the gap until we can get to the threads. And it's going to have the cameraman jack that up. And that's fine right there. And just enough to finger tighten this. And that should hold it. Now we'll release the jack. And then the same thing we did on the bottom. We'll take our 27, at least this time both sizes are 27. And we'll again tighten this up. And again, we're not torquing it yet. We're just trying to tighten everything up. We'll torque it next. And like I said, these were 17 foot-pounds. So like before, we'll take this old nut and we'll discard him. And then what we'll be doing is taking the new nut and washer. We'll put this bracket through here, put the washer on top of that, put the nut on top of that. We'll torque this guy down to 17. You can undo this thing here that we're using to keep him from getting damaged. This is our bracket that goes up here. And this is the bracket. We'll just kind of hold this here until we get the caliper back on. But we'll torque this guy down. We're going to torque this lower guy down to 94 foot-pounds. This guy's 74. You probably can't get a torque wrench in here. But after I tighten these guys up, when we get to the point of torquing it, I'll show you a trick on how you can at least get the torque kind of close. All right, so we'll take a break and come back. All right, we got the bottom torqued at 94. I haven't put the cotter pin in yet. I'm working on torquing the top. And like I said, you know, if you come on the side here, this is one of my lowest profile torque wrenches, and there's just no way I'm going to get it in here. The dealer would have had the axle out and torqued it and put the axle shaft back in from underneath on the lift doing this type of job. But we don't want to do that. So how can we get it torqued? Now, some videos will just say, you know, make it tight. And that's one way to do it. But I'd like to get it somewhat close to the torque. So I'm going to show you kind of like a ghetto way to do it if you don't have the right tools. I'm going to use my 27-inch wrench. And I'm going to take the old ball joint. And we're going to run 2 of the castle nuts on it. And so, yeah, I know you guys are watching this. You're thinking, wow, that's ghetto. But it works, right? You can drop this in here. And then we can hook it like this, and we'll lose some torque with this extension, but it'll be close enough and it'll get us closer to the actual 74 foot-pounds that are recommended than if we were just trying to tighten it by hand. And that's good enough for me and a lot closer. All right, now we're going to put our outer tie rod into the steering knuckle. Now these GM ones don't use a cotter pin. They use a prevailing torque nut design. So make sure you put a new prevailing torque nut on here. This is an 18 millimeter, and this is going to get torqued down to 46 foot-pounds. And when you do that, these guys have a tendency to spin on you. So keep that 2x4 handy. And what you can do is come under here and put some pressure on it as you torque it up, and that'll help prevent it from spinning. I'm going to get it started just with a regular ratchet wrench. Try and get past that point. Now, as long as it's giving me some tightness, I know that I've got it where I can torque it later. All right, so we're going to put these cotter pins in. I'll come back and show you what that looks like. And I'm going to take some brake cleaner and make sure we've got no grease on this rotor. In fact, this rotor is probably something I need to get taken off and turned sometime, but I don't want to fool with it right now. And we'll put the caliper back on, and then we'll be able to put we'll be ready to put the wheel back on. All right, we're going to put this guy to 46 foot-pounds. We did these to 17 foot-pounds. Not going to torque this yet, of course, until we get the cable for the brake hose. I've got this guy actually getting kind of dark again out here. I've got this bracket in position. We've pushed this connector back into the frame hole, and we've reconnected it for the speed sensor. Now I'm going to I already did the bottom cotter pin. Remember, the bottom is 94 and the top is 74. I will show you that in the shop manual in just a second. Let's take a look at this cotter pin, right? So we torque these guys until that hole is perfectly clear and visible. Hopefully you guys can see that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to slide this guy through, put in the same way the factory did. Right, we're going to put the top piece that's longer on top, and we're going to bury the head inside one of the castle crevices. Let me see if I can get this magnetic guy to sit there. I don't know if you guys can see this or not, but I'll put it back on when I'm done. I'm going to separate these two pieces of this cotter pin with this flathead screwdriver. And bend it over. Up against the bottom of the stud. And that is exactly how they came from the factory and when we took them off. Now I've cleaned the rotor with brake cleaner. Any brand will do. Some GM stuff I have. So we get any grease or grime we had on there. I haven't torqued this axle nut yet. Just tightened him by hand for now. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to make sure after all this stuff's assembled, we don't hear anything. You know, we're going to hear, like, you know, just the thing moving, but we don't hear anything grinding. We want to make sure the shield didn't get bent in the back or something else is binding with the axle shaft. And I probably didn't mention it earlier, but I also checked to make sure there were no holes in this CV joint boot. So let's bring our caliper assembly back over. And we're going to twist this around so we don't have any kinks. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to get this guy back on. I'm not necessarily going to film this whole thing because it's going to be a little bit of working back and forth. And then we'll get this back in and we'll put this down and we'll go over the torque for these two bolts. All right, we got the caliper on. We're almost done. We're going to torque down these 13 millimeter retaining bolts here to 13 foot-pounds. This one here and then the one up at the top here. And I did not do it yesterday, so I'm going to do it now. We're going to torque this upper shock absorber retaining bolt back to 66 foot-pounds. It's a 6.6. And then when we're done with this, it's got more to go on it than I thought. All right. All right, so just to review, we had 17 foot-pounds on these 13s, 13 foot-pounds on these 13s, 66 foot-pounds on this, 46 on the outer tie rod, 74 foot-pounds on the upper ball joint. And I mentioned, I think I said I'd show you guys this. So here we see the upper ball joint for a four-wheel drive vehicle for this year is 74 foot-pounds. So I don't care what you see in other videos, that's what it is for a four-wheel drive from the factory. And the lower ball joint for replacement on four-wheel drive, if we look to the installation there, that is 94 foot-pounds on the bottom. So 94 on the bottom, 74 on the top, with cotter pins installed. And at this point, we're ready to put the wheel and tire back on. We're going to want to lower this guy before we do the torque on these cam bolts. Now remember, we made the marks on the cam bolts. We're going to go take a 21 millimeter wrench and we're going to make sure that before we get this guy on, we're going to make sure that those marks line back up to what we drew. And then we're going to just snug it. We're not going to make it tight. I'm not going to torque it, rather, because when we put the wheel on and we get the full vehicle weight on, the control arm is going to move. Suspension is going to take its natural Z alignment state based on the weight of the vehicle. After it's in that position, we're going to recheck that our marks are the same, and then we're going to torque these to 140 foot-pounds. We're going to do the front first and the back last. Once we do that, we're ready to take it to the alignment shop and have a more professional front-end alignment done. Actually, let me say one more thing, and we're going to before we do that, after all that's done, we'll torque this guy to 165 foot-pounds. What I'm going to do before I torque him is I'm going to get a screwdriver, or you can do like this, a little pry bar, and I'm just going to hand tighten it to the point where it feels snug. I don't want it torqued yet because I want the weight of the vehicle on it, but I want it seated as far as I can without torquing it. All right, let's get the wheel on. Let's drop it down and wrap this up. All right, we've got just this guy to finish up, 165. And then the lug nuts on this particular vehicle are 120. So we've got that done. And then what I did before I finished that up, we came in here. Remember, we made our marks. Just make those alignments. You're going to have to come in here with a wrench. Now, when you take this to the shop, they got a special lift where they can move the tire around. It's a little bit difficult on the concrete. You're going to have to get this in a position, hold it with a wrench while you torque it out. Remember, it's 140 on the front. And I haven't finished the back yet, just to show you what I've got. I use a wrench here to hold it on the alignment, and then I torque it up on the nut side to 140. Remember, front first, then the back. So this is all ready to go over to the shop later this afternoon. I hope this video helped you out. This is a long video. There's a lot of information in here, and a lot of part numbers and a lot of stuff. If you've got questions, leave them in the comments. If you found the video useful, please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.